Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I am Executive Producer Michael Yaffee.
A pleasure to be with you again this week, Michael. And in just a few minutes, we are going to be joined by one of our favorite guests here on the Florida Roundtable, national political analyst Rhodes Cook. He has a special midterm 2018 edition of his Cook letter coming out that will be chock full of information on what happened on election night. And, of course, here in Florida, we got a couple of things that we're still not certain what happened. And another chapter yet to be written. So if you'll pull up a chair and put an ear on the radio, the Florida Roundtable begins following these messages.
It's happening to you every night. One snores, and the other can't sleep. It seems like there's no end to it. But now there's a quick and easy-to-use solution, a natural solution. Snore Stop. Try it risk-free today. Snore Stop was created and tested by a team of physicians and has been helping couples sleep for over 20 years. It is the #1 selling anti-snoring medicine in the U.S. Snore Stop sprays or tablets are now available nationwide. All you have to do is call. It's time to try Snore Stop and make every night a better night for both of you. Don't wait. Try Snore Stop, the #1 selling anti-snoring medicine in the U.S. spray or tablets. Call right now for free shipping and your 100% risk-free trial offer. 800-960-4918. 800-960-4918. 800-960-4918. That's 800-960-4918.
It was once explained to me that the reason we're commanded to love our neighbors and to love our enemies is that they're often the same people. Examine the story of the Good Samaritan. Notice that the Samaritan was from an ethnic group that the Jews positively despised. And while an assaulted man was repeatedly ignored by his own people, the so-called hated Samaritan willingly gave aid to the injured Jewish man. Now, if Jesus were telling the story today, he would replace Samaritan with the enemy of whomever he was talking to. Either way, in reality, everyone is our neighbor. One reason Christianity is so unique is that we're called to love our enemies. We're called to be fair with them and compassionate towards them and demonstrate love, even if they hate us. God's word is clear. You can't claim to love God and not love your neighbor. Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan so we would be clear who our neighbor is and go and do likewise. This is Bryant Wright, speaking right from my heart.
Visit rightfromtheheart.org.
This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm Executive Producer Michael Yaffee.
Michael, a pleasure to be with you, and here we are. The elections are finally over. All of those annoying commercials are gone.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
For at least the next 6 months, as far
Right.
as I can tell, you know.
I don't know. It's already presidential. They're already starting.
I was going to say that, but yes.
2020 presidential election.
My emails have been flowing with them already.
Oh, really?
Oh, my goodness. But that's another story. Well, I have our latest election data. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
It now shows 42% voted for the incumbent. 31% voted for the challenger, and 27% thought they were in a Mega Millions ticket line.
I can understand that. They were a little late for that one, though.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes I think that's when we look at the results, that maybe who knows? I won't go there. But here we are in Florida again, and
Lots of interesting stuff happened. The biggest surprise to me was the fact that 11 of the 12 amendments passed.
yes, and the one that lost by a little bit, I mean, it came close.
Yeah.
You had to have 60% to get this amendment passed, was the one that would have increased your homeowner's tax break for people who have homes worth more than $100,000.
I mean, I can't believe that many amendments passed. I can't believe that one didn't pass. I can't believe.
Yeah.
Because this, you know what this means?
That's the one you would have thought would go through.
Right. I mean, this means we're going to see more of these every election.
It does. And I have, you spoke with my old friend Jim Callinger, who's with a grassroots group of people that
they didn't listen to him, unfortunately.
They think this constitutional revision business is a bunch of falderall.
Uh-huh.
And we've had, our friend from the Florida Independent Colleges was here, and the former congressman. They're all against this thing. I think they need to buckle down and redouble their efforts.
I guess so, because they were calling to vote no on all the amendments proposed by the Constitution Revision Commission.
Yeah.
And all of them passed.
And it's been a pet peeve of mine for years, probably since I've been doing this show, that there are too many things in the Florida Constitution that don't belong there.
We have the same pet peeve, Reagan.
I just, the whole federal Constitution, the United States Constitution, that goes back into the 1780s, doesn't have 30 amendments,
Yeah, I know.
And Florida's, which is the revised Constitution that we've had since the end of the Civil War, has almost 80. And
80.
With the addition of these, we're closer to 90.
It's unbelievable.
Including how hog farmers are supposed to treat their hogs.
Oh, and now there's one about greyhound racing.
Yeah.
I mean, why is that in the Constitution?
No, it's a state law. That's fine. I have no trouble with that.
Right.
But it is not a part of a constitution of how a state should govern itself.
I agree.
I just don't see that. And, of course, you out there on the other end of the line, you may say, well, those guys are full of it. Maybe we should have this. I don't know. It's a matter of notion, I guess. But, boy, Mike and I are not neutral on this one. We have too many constitutional amendments.
Luckily, the lines weren't too long in my polling place, but I know they're long in a lot of other ones because people were reading through them all.
Well, sure, and when you've got it, and much of it done in legalese double talk.
I know.
Very hard to understand. Well, we're going to take a look across the country and around Florida. Our special guest this day is going to be national political analyst Rhodes Cook. He is one of our favorite guests here on the round table. Insightful analysis of all of these things, and he explains them in English to us so that we all understand, and that's a wonderful thing. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And the Florida Roundtable will continue following these messages.
For Florida families facing the challenge of a loved one with an opioid use disorder, it's important to know that shallow breathing, snoring, or gurgling sounds and unresponsiveness can all be signs of an overdose. In the event of an emergency, an at-home rescue treatment like naloxone can help save a life. Naloxone is available without a prescription and doesn't need to be administered by a health professional. Find out more at isavefl.com. Brought to you by the Florida Department of Children and Families.
The wind in your hair, the sun on your face. There's nothing like experiencing Florida's waterways on a personal watercraft. Knowing how your PWC operates will keep you safe on the water. Remember, PWCs need thrust to change direction, so use a controlled amount of throttle to turn. Know your limits, never ride recklessly, and always wear your life jacket. Safe boating is no accident. To learn more, visit the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission at myfwc.com.
In a world of tiny tomatoes and backyard pests, one man and his better half dig deep to save backyard gardens.
Joni, stand by to upload expert videos.
Already loaded, Tom.
Wow, you're good.
You're not so bad yourself.
Tom and Joni McCubbin star in hisandhersgardening.com. Critics rave.
Tom and Joni, they really grow on you. 2 green thumbs up.
Don't miss hisandhersgardening.com.
Wow, your flowers are gorgeous. What's your secret?
It's no secret. It's Bare Advanced.
You mean these blue bottles?
Uh-huh. I protect my beauties with all-in-one rose and flower care. It's insect and disease control plus fertilizer.
Really? What's this 12-month tree and shrub protect and feed?
Oh, I use it on my trees. It kills bugs for up to a year, plus it feeds. It's that easy. Hey, where are you going?
To get my own. I want a great yard, too.
Bare Advanced. Get more from the blue bottle. Always read and follow label instructions.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And Michael, as promised, we are off to the D.C. area where we are joined by a marvelous friend, a good friend of this program for these many years, and I dare say probably the man who has been on Florida Roundtable more than any other guest over the years. And that would include Buddy McKay when he was lieutenant governor. And the list is quite long of folks who come to visit. But we are delighted to welcome back Mr. Rhodes Cook. Rhodes, how are you, sir?
Doing okay. Reagan, thank you very much.
Well,
I hope you folks are doing as well.
Yes,
or partially as well, whatever.
Those of our audience, the political junkies who ended up sitting up most of the night, election night, wondering what was going on down here in Florida. In many cases, we are still wondering what is going on, but we'll come around to that. Before we get into all of it, Rhodes, of course, Rhodes Cook for many years has been the author of the Cook political letter, the Cook letter. It's rhodescook.com. All sorts of wonderful information on our political scene, knowledgeable of the history of these things. And, of course, you have a special edition that's going to be coming out on the midterms of 2018.
Yes, that'll be several weeks from now, probably about a month. It takes that long for most of the states to get their votes in official order. But, yes, there will be a post-election issue coming up in the not-too-distant future.
And folks who hear this show today, if they're interested in getting a hold of that, rhodescook.com, is that the best place for them to look?
Yes, I would say so. www.rhodescook.com. Yes.
All right. Well, we'll remind them of that again. Of course, your letter covering the entire nation, so that's as good a place as any to start. And I guess in broad terms, maybe not a fair question, but your overall reaction to the 2018 midterms, and then we can look at some specific cases. But what was your feeling?
I think it's been referred to as a split decision. I think it was really a better night for the Democrats because they went back a whole chamber of Congress and the House of Representatives. That gives them a beachhead in Washington that they didn't have in the first 2 years of the Trump administration. The Senate was always going to be tough because there were so many Democratic seats that they had to defend. And so that ended up Republicans showing a net gain of a few seats there, but that was not expected. The Republicans controlled the Senate going into November 6th, and they controlled the Senate by a few more seats going out. Governorships, Democrats were way down in the first 2 years of the Trump administration. They only had 16 governorships out of 50, and and that was compounded by also Republican dominance of many of the state legislatures around the country. It looks like the Democrats will win a number of governorships, probably 5 or 6 at this point, is what I'd say. State legislatures, we'll have to see. I think they're still tallying up the votes and will probably for weeks. But it looks like the Democrats picked up several hundred state legislative seats around the country. What that means in control of state senates or state houses, again, we'll have to probably a few weeks away from getting a firm picture of that. But the state legislatures, and the governorships are, particularly important this time of a decade, because we're heading into the 2020 census and the next round of congressional and legislative redistricting. And who controls, the legislatures and the map drawing process in many of the states is going on going to have the upper hand, as the Republicans did back after the last round of redistricting in 2010, 2011, into early 2012. So the Democrats basically let that one go. They did not contest the state legislatures, I think, as strongly as they could have back in 2010. I think this election, they contested it a lot harder, and it looks like there have been some payoffs. And in short, it looks like they should be in better shape for the next round of redistricting coming up, probably 2021 in most states, and that might bleed into 2022.
And so you're talking about how the Democrats really did have a good night. Do you think it was mostly because of being against Trump, or do you think there were many other issues involved?
Well, as far as I can tell, this was a more presidentially focused midterm election than most. I mean, midterms often are about the president. I mean, it is a referendum of sorts on a president, but a president usually does not throw themselves into it, as much as Trump did this fall. I mean, normally a president will make a few campaign appearances around the country, but then they sit back and govern, which is a job they were elected to. They don't go out and do a lot of rallies, or they don't tweet or things like that. So Trump brought this to a particularly high level of presidential involvement and seemed to be quite happy, to make it, a referendum on himself. So I think we'll have to view the results in that light, as to how well the Republicans did and how well the Democrats fared. I mean, much of the energy on both sides was provided by Trump, but it seemed like much of the year, and probably, up through Election Day, those who strongly disapproved of Trump was a much larger number than those who strongly approved of him. So I think that has to be taken into account, and I think that was a big part of the Democratic success. Now, issues, the Democrats did a lot with the health care issue and the business of pre-existing conditions and guaranteeing that people are covered who have pre-existing conditions. And the Republicans are playing catch-up on that, it seems, throughout the fall. And one could question, the issues that Trump and the Republicans chose to emphasize, such as immigration and the caravan and Mr. Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, whether those were the wisest issue to stress when you had a booming economy going on. That seemed to be underplayed by the Republicans, and that's a head-scratcher. That really is a head-scratcher. But anyway, yes, I think by and large, this was a reflection of voter attitudes toward Donald Trump and the issues that he raised.
I want to, going into this, there was so much talk that the Democrats were activating, and boy, they were going to really get out there and be busy and that sort of thing. And I heard some analysts say, oh, there's going to be a blue tsunami. And I, for my part, watching and knowing history, as you study a lot of history too, I don't know that we saw a blue tsunami. I think back 1966, I believe, when the Democrats lost 66 seats in the House, that I would refer to as a tsunami. But what happened this past week, yes, they won the House, they had a blue wave, but I don't think I would call it a tsunami.
No, I would agree. It wasn't that. I mean, I think you would only have a tsunami if they also won back the U.S. Senate, and they didn't get close to doing that. But it was probably a respectable size wave. I think, a couple things probably kept it from being a tsunami. One is the basic shape of the midterm electorate. I think the rule of thumb is that it's generally smaller, whiter, and older than a presidential electorate. And as a result, that's generally a more pro-Republican formula than you get in the average presidential election year. Still have to look at the data. I think it's going to be important to look at the exit polls a little more, particularly on the demographics of this election. Was there a larger youth vote? Was there a larger minority vote? The gender gap, things of that ilk, where there's things in play that turn this into a more democratic electorate than normal. But even with that, we start with the fact that a midterm election generally is a more pro-Republican electorate than is a presidential election. Another thing that I'm particularly interested in is what is the ultimate size of this turnout, that we had on Tuesday. In 2014, the total congressional vote, the total vote for the House of Representatives was only 75 million, which is maybe 60% or so the size of the previous presidential year turnout. I've heard figures as high as 105 million as the turnout for this election on Tuesday, which would put it squarely between a midterm election turnout and a presidential election turnout. And that would be a significant increase. If you increased it by 30 million, you'd have created a different animal, than exists in your average midterm election, and could be a major reason why the Democrats did well in the House, pretty well in the governorships and state legislatures, and made it I'd say maybe a Democratic wave, as you say, but not a tsunami.
All right, tell you what, Rhodes, on that point, we're going to have to take a pause along the network line here. Let us remind folks that they are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
A very special guest this day, national political analyst Rhodes Cook. A special edition of the Cook letter coming out in about a month or so. Go to rhodescook.com and check it out. You'll want to get your hands on that one. Well, we'll invite you to stay put. Our conversation continues following these messages.
It was once explained to me that the reason we're commanded to love our neighbors and to love our enemies is that they're often the same people. Examine the story of the Good Samaritan. Notice that the Samaritan was from an ethnic group that the Jews positively despised. And while an assaulted man was repeatedly ignored by his own people, the so-called hated Samaritan willingly gave aid to the injured Jewish man. Now, if Jesus were telling the story today, he would replace Samaritan with the enemy of whomever he was talking to. Either way, in reality, everyone is our neighbor. One reason Christianity is so unique is that we're called to love our enemies. We're called to be fair with them and compassionate towards them and demonstrate love, even if they hate us. God's word is clear. You can't claim to love God and not love your neighbor. Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan so we would be clear who our neighbor is and go and do likewise. This is Bryant Wright, speaking right from my heart.
Visit rightfromtheheart.org.
Florida's boating environment is always changing. New sunsets, new experiences that you won't find anywhere else on Earth. But one thing that never changes, boating while impaired by drugs or alcohol. It's illegal in the state of Florida. Boating under the influence will land you in jail, or worse, kill someone you love. It's just simply not a risk worth taking. Learn more about Florida's boating laws at myfwc.com. Brought to you by the FWC Division of Law Enforcement.
Your yard's days of being picked on are over, thanks to the science of Bear Advanced Brush Killer Plus. Its penetrating formula is specifically designed to kill hard-to-control brush, like kudzu, poison ivy, poison oak, and wild berries, roots and all. And the concentrate product even kills stumps, so your yard never has to worry about being bullied. Bear Advanced. Get more from the blue bottle. BearAdvanced.com. Always read and follow label directions.
Terrorist acts and shootings are often described as great tragedies. They are not. We live in a world so concerned with being politically correct that they're afraid to call evil what it is, evil. Man's sin nature is as old as the Garden of Eden. Many love to blame culture, poverty, or lack of education and opportunity as the problem. They may have a good or bad impact, but the big problem is sin. Acknowledging our sin nature will show us our need for a Savior who changes us from within. That Savior's name is Jesus. He came to die for the sins of all who will acknowledge their sin. Faith in Him strikes a mighty blow at evil. So quit calling man's evil acts a tragedy. They are evil and God hates it. Yet thankfully He loves us in spite of our evil and sin. Jesus not only forgives us, but gives us the want to overcome evil with good. This is Brian Wright, speaking right from my heart.
All right, crew, let's get her dug.
Honey, you want to give me a hand? I'm planting that tree, remember?
No matter how large or small your digging project may be, no matter how urban or rural, you must always call 811 before any digging project. 811 is our national one-call number, alerting your local utility companies to come out and mark any lines they have near your dig site. You must call 811 at least 2 to 3 business days before any digging project, so you can avoid hitting our essential buried utilities. This includes natural gas and petroleum pipelines, electric, communication cables, and water and sewer lines. So before you do this or this, make sure you do this. For digging projects big or small, make the call to 811. Brought to you by Common Ground Alliance.
From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
Our very special guest this day is national political analyst Rhodes Cook, one of the great friends of Florida Roundtable. Rhodes, we appreciate you being with us, and I do want to remind folks that there will be a special edition of your Cook letter coming out, your national analysis of the midterms of 2018. It'll be out in a month or thereabouts, and folks can go to rhodescook.com. That's RHODES Cook, COOK.com, and get information on how they can get a hold of a copy of your special midterm election edition. Now, looking around the country, interesting things going on. Massachusetts, Rhodes, arguably the most liberal state in the country, had to be a bunch of ballot splitting going on. The voters in Massachusetts re-elected a Republican governor to a second term at the same time that they were returning arguably one of the most liberal senators in the U.S. Senate, Elizabeth Warren, to another term in the U.S. Senate. So obviously a split decision in Massachusetts.
Yes. This happens in a few states where you have the two parties splitting the major offices. As you cite Massachusetts, that's been going on for a while there in Massachusetts in particular and other parts of New England, or generally, where the Republicans who tend to run for governor are moderate Republicans that can, get Democratic votes. And they're often people who kind of sell themselves as budget conscious, good businessmen, socially moderate or liberal, and they tend to do, these type of Republicans tend to do very well in governor's races where they're, a state executive, and they tend to get along with the Democrats in the legislature. While the Senate races tend to stay, say, Democratic in these in states like Massachusetts or Rhode Island or Connecticut, places like that. But you also had that in Ohio, I think your home state, Reagan, where you had a Republican governor elected along with a Democratic senator who was reelected. But by and large, this type of ticket splitting used to be the norm, a few decades ago. Now it's unusual. Now you have, most states kind of vote in sync, where you have the governor and the senator, being elected from the same party. And it looks like there's a good chance of that happening in Florida. At least it's, trending that way based on the latest returns. And that's more the norm around the country. I think we look at the Senate seats that changed party hands. The lone Democratic pickup was in Nevada, which is the only Senate seat where there was a Republican senator in a state that voted for Hillary Clinton. And so the Democrats did pick up that seat. But then there were 10 states where there was a Democratic senator in a state that Donald Trump won. And there were even more Republican gains there, starting with a state like North Dakota, and Indiana. Appears it's likely to be the case in Florida. And they just missed in West Virginia, where Joe Manchin was reelected. And so that was noteworthy, really, that Joe Manchin was reelected in a very significant Trump state. More often than not, as I say, we tend to have gotten away from that ticket splitting. We seem to have known, in favor of that one-party voting within a particular state. So, in a way, that's too bad, because it enabled us to have a more moderate and civil, discourse in our government, both at the state and national levels than we do now.
You mentioned Joe Manchin there, one of the Democrats who was able to keep his Senate seat in a Trump state. How much of an effect do you think the whole Kavanaugh thing had on a race like that, Joe Manchin being one of the only Democrats to vote to confirm Kavanaugh?
Well, he won by about 20,000 votes. Now, that would have been interesting if he had been like Heidi Heitkamp, a Democratic senator up in North Dakota, and, say, voted against Kavanaugh. Now, Heitkamp went down to about a 10-point defeat, though she was in a tough race to begin with. Manchin, I don't know. That vote for Kavanaugh may have saved him, or it might have enabled him to win a clear-cut victory as opposed to a nail-biter. But he, it was a vote that helped his political situation in West Virginia, and I guess we'll have to let some others parse as whether it was to a decisive vote, in creating the outcome in Manchin's favor, or whether we would have done something. So anyway, and of course it might be one of those situations where we'll never know. But it was a vote that Manchin seemed comfortable making, and it certainly didn't hurt him, in West Virginia.
I have, as you look around the country, and I'm going to go back to this a little bit, but I wanted to look at the, I guess we would say the demographics or whatever. You alluded to this in our first segment. But we did seem to have a higher turnout in this midterm than we do in most years. But in many places, including Florida, they're saying that now, and we can talk more about this as we get into the Florida kind of thing, is that in many areas what they thought was going to be a heavy Democratic turnout did not materialize. I mean, obviously it was good for them. They got the House and they did that, but not what they expected.
Well, Florida, I think, is an interesting case. It's kind of a purple state with, it seems, a little bit of a Republican lean to it. You would have to tell me what the demographic trend is now in Florida. I mean, is the minority population going up? Are you getting a lot of new voters from out of state or from out of the country, who have settled in Florida? Is it a electorate that is highly changing? We have some states like my home state of Pennsylvania or yours, Reagan, of Ohio, where the demographic mix changes incrementally. But in a state like Florida or in a state like Texas or a state like Georgia, you have a much faster demographic change going on, which is going to affect, the vote in 2020 and, going down from there. I think, it is kind of interesting whether the elections we're having now, 2016, to a degree 2018, are kind of the last stand of the native white voter in the United States. And, in the fact that we're kind of evolving maybe toward a more diverse electorate. I think the population figures, that seems to be happening inexorably, though that whole process may take the next, say, 30 years or so, to be consummated into whatever comes next in American history. But it is an interesting situation. You're on the front lines of that in terms of a state with fast-changing demographics. What does the electorate?
I can tell you this, Rhodes, that one of our syndicated analysts who's based in Central Florida said the reason we're in this whole thing in Florida going on that we'll talk about in just a minute or two is happening because the only area of Florida where the Democrats actually turned out like they thought they would was like Orange and Osceola counties. And in the rest of the state, the turnout was rather poor. But we're going to have to hold that thought. We have to remind folks that they're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
Our very special guest this day is national political analyst Rhodes Cook, author of the Cook Letter, rhodescook.com. Stay put. The conversation continues in a moment.
An opioid overdose does not need to end in tragedy. At-home rescue treatments like naloxone products can help you save the life of a friend or a loved one. Naloxone is available without a prescription and doesn't need to be administered by a health professional. Learn to recognize the signs of an overdose, like unresponsiveness, snoring sounds, and shallow breathing, and be prepared for an emergency by keeping a naloxone product on hand. Find out more at isavefl.com. Brought to you by the Florida Department of Children and Families.
One time he forgot to fuel up the boat. And it wouldn't be the first time he left his tackle box behind. On one trip he even headed out without his lucky hat. And seems he almost always forgets to wear his sunscreen. But he never forgets to wear the one thing that could save his life. Life jackets save lives. Wear it, Florida.
Visit myfwc.com for more information.
Where do you want to go on a vacation or honeymoon? The Caribbean, Europe, Hawaii, Mexico? How about Disney or a cruise? At Superior Cruise and Travel, we've got you covered. We'll assign you your own travel concierge. They'll help you design a custom vacation plan that you can't find online. And the service is completely free. You can't compare the value of this to any other online travel company. We can help you plan a custom vacation anywhere in the world. We even offer payment plans with no credit card required. Now you pay off your vacation on your time schedule. Call now and mention the promo code RADIO and save up to $500. Book your custom trip. Call Superior Cruise and Travel now and talk to one of the highest-rated travel agencies in the country with a 5-star A+ online rating.
800-659-5087. 800-659-5087. 800-659-5087. That's 800-659-5087.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
A very special guest this day, national political analyst Rhodes Cook, author of the Cook Letter. He will have a special edition of that political analysis letter coming out in a month or so on the 2018 midterms. You can get details on how to order it at rhodescook.com. That's RHODESCOOK.com. It will be chock full of numbers and analysis, and Rhodes has over the years been very good at no, he doesn't lean Democrat or Republican. He takes the material and analyzes it and drives a path right down the middle, supplies you with all sorts of information, and you can kind of make up your own mind as to how you're feeling about that. Well, Rhodes, as we went into that last break, I was mentioning that we have a syndicated analyst here in the Central Florida area who was pointing out that Florida is in this situation that we're in right now because the only area of the state where the Democrats turned out in increased numbers, high numbers for a midterm election, was the Central Florida area. That is Orange County, Orlando, and Osceola County, where Disney World is located, where there are many thousands of new voters, people who came here a year ago after the hurricane, many in the Hispanic community, specifically Puerto Ricans who came here, and they did turn out. But that didn't happen in southeast Florida, in the heavily Democratic community down there. And he points out that by the Secretary of State's office, Florida has somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 more registered Democrats than it does Republicans. And yet here we are in a tie. And he goes on to point out, too, that when you walk away from the national picture, Florida really is a red state. The last time the Democrats won a cabinet office statewide in the state of Florida, any cabinet office, was 1998. They have not had a governor win election in 24 years. And he would submit, and I probably kind of tend to agree with him, if you take the national stuff out of the picture, it makes Florida a pretty red state. The Republicans have maintained big majorities in the Florida House and in the Florida Senate for over 20 years now. And so that's his notion that the Democrats, in fact, did not turn out in the numbers that were hoped for. And I find that to be interesting.
Yes, I do too. You know, listening to your analysis there, Reagan, it seems like in the last quarter century or so, some of the states, you know, there are a number of states, you know, and particularly in the South, you know, where things have flipped. It used to be that, you know, Republicans would dominate the presidential vote in a state like Florida, say over the latter third of the 20th century, while Democrats, though, would remain in control of the congressional delegation and of the governorship. And, you know, it was a big event when Republicans would elect a governor or even a senator. You know, back in that day, I think it was in part because there was even a more top-heavy Democratic registration advantage because you had the older white voters, you know, out of force of habit or whatever, you know, registering Democratic and voting Democratic below the presidential level. Now that seems to have flipped. It's the Republicans who are dominating below the presidential level, while Democrats tend to hold their own, in presidential races. And I guess Obama carried the state twice, as did Clinton. So if you're going to have a generally successful and appealing Democratic presidential candidate nationally, they're going to hold their own in Florida. But as you say, they don't tend to win Senate races or governorships much anymore. You have to go back into the 20th century to find the last Democratic governor. Was it Lawton Childs?
Yep.
I guess this is becoming almost like a Jeopardy question, because you have to go back a way, and, the Republicans have the state legislature, and they have most of the congressional seats. So it is something that is happening not just in Florida. It's happened, I think, in other areas as well. Georgia, kind of sticks out. But it's a fact, too, that I think in many states, a Democratic registration advantage has to be big in order for that to translate into Democratic victories down ticket. You have to have, if you say have a Democratic registration advantage of maybe 500,000, that's not enough, to win the governorship or a Senate race. And as I say, that's not just native to Florida. You find that in a lot of places because the Democratic coalition tends to be, broader, more diverse, often including a number of young people, people who are maybe not as reliable voters as a more homogeneous Republican electorate. So Democrats need to really would probably need to build up their registration advantage in Florida to around 1 million, before, in order to, begin winning below the presidential level again.
And Rhodes, I'll tell you what, this has been an interesting and enlightening conversation. The and apparently more chapters to be written once again. We jokingly say that we live in Florida. That's FLORI-DUH, and we're never quite certain on how things are going to come out. But before we part company, I want to, again, go ahead and give the folks the information on your special edition of the Cook Letter that is going to be out in a month or so.
Yeah, the Rhodes Cook Letter, I publish 4 times a year, and the last issue of 2018 is a post-election issue, and it's they generally run 20, 25 pages in length, so I hope a readable 25. I like to feature graphics, in my presentation of data. I like maps, like line graphs, I like bar graphs, pie charts, whatever, hopefully keeping them simple enough that even I can understand them. But anyway, I encourage people to take a look at www.rhodescook.com if they want to see kind of a sample of what a newsletter looks like, what the information is in it, and what the graphics look like. So I appreciate you mentioning it, as always, and, always enjoy being with you.
Well, it is a great pleasure and an honor to have you with us. Rhodes Cook, one of the fine political analysts in the nation today. As I say, he does all this marvelous work, and he puts it into English we all understand and can figure out what he's talking about without a whole lot of difficulty. So it's marvelous. Rhodes, thank you again. This is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And a brief closing thought following these messages.
It was once explained to me that the reason we're commanded to love our neighbors and to love our enemies is that they're often the same people. Examine the story of the Good Samaritan. Notice that the Samaritan was from an ethnic group that the Jews positively despised. And while an assaulted man was repeatedly ignored by his own people, the so-called hated Samaritan willingly gave aid to the injured Jewish man. Now, if Jesus were telling the story today, he would replace Samaritan with the enemy of whomever he was talking to. Either way, in reality, everyone is our neighbor. One reason Christianity is so unique is that we're called to love our enemies. We're called to be fair with them and compassionate towards them and demonstrate love, even if they hate us. God's Word is clear. You can't claim to love God and not love your neighbor. Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan so we would be clear who our neighbor is and go and do likewise. This is Bryant Wright, speaking right from my heart.
Visit rightfromtheheart.org.
Do you have an idea for an invention or new product? Do you think companies would be interested in your idea? Do you want to try to get a patent? Then call InventHelp now. InventHelp keeps your idea confidential and explains every step of the invention process. We create professional materials representing your idea and submit it to companies who are looking for new ideas. We have more than 9,000 companies who've agreed to review ideas in confidence. If a company shows interest in manufacturing your invention, we can negotiate on your behalf. We have helped over 10,000 clients receive patents. We also offer services including 3D modeling and animation demonstrating your idea, prototyping services, and we use state-of-the-art technology to show InventHelp client ideas to additional companies. Join the thousands of people just like you who chose InventHelp to pursue their idea. We are experienced. We are working for you. We are InventHelp.
Call us for free information at 1-800-542-6751. That's 1-800-542-6751. Again, 1-800-542-6751.
In a world of tiny tomatoes and backyard pests, one man and his better half dig deep to save backyard gardens.
Joni, stand by to upload expert videos.
Already loaded, Tom.
Wow, you're good.
You're not so bad yourself.
Tom and Joni McCubbin star in hisandhersgardening.com. Critics rave.
Tom and Joni, they really grow on you. 2 green thumbs up.
Don't miss hisandhersgardening.com.
Employ Florida offers resources and services to help you find employment.
Hi, Gary here. Employ Florida helped me improve my interview skills, plus write a great resume. I attended networking events with many employers and other industry professionals just like me. With the workshops and training found at employflorida.com, I was able to land a great job in my field.
Job resources, real results, hired. EmployFlorida.com. That's EmployFlorida.com.
We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Michael Yaffee.
And always a pleasure to have Rhodes Cook with us. Insightful analysis of how we vote and what happens. Yeah. And he did not disappoint today. Lots of great things to be looking at there. Michael, you have a couple of other venues that folks you share all kinds of information with.
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is to follow me on Twitter at Beyond Reason R. I've been tweeting about midterm results and got podcasts up there and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, that is a great deal of fun, and Mike keeps that up to date so that you can find the latest. Well, if they can figure out up in Tallahassee what the election divisions is doing,
yeah, that's true.
But we will, of course, always try to keep up with that and keep you informed as well. Next week, scheduled to be with us, Patrick K. O'Donnell. We have just passed the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, and it's important to us today. We'll find out why when we see you on the Florida Roundtable in 1 week.
You've been listening to the Florida Roundtable, a news and public affairs presentation of the Florida News Network. The views and opinions expressed during this show are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's management, ownership, or sponsors. Please email your comments to reagansmith@fnnonline.net.